Somebody's calling again.
Where's Bob?
He's on the call. Oh, he's the teleconference call. Okay.
Call to order. Start off with a roll call.
Director Kaczynski,
Present.
Chairman Gleason,
Here.
Vice Chair Heyman,
Here.
Director Vallejo,
Present.
Director Page. Should be
Present.
Thank you. We'll follow it up with a pledge of allegiance led by Mr. Boyd. Please remain standing for a moment of prayer, silence, and meditation after the pledge. Thank you. Mr. Hall, report on closed session.
We'll be having closed session after.
Doesn't report from the last one?
Nothing to report from our last closed session, no.
Thank you. Public comments. This is time for the public to address the board about matters not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by the law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. So if any of you would like to make a public comment on an issue that's not on the agenda, now's your opportunity to do so. Any takers? Wow. Can I have a show of hands? Anybody else who's wants to make a public comment? So this will be the only one? Okay.
Good morning. My name's Elaine Mead. I have a couple of questions. I was hoping that Mr. Markman would be here today. At the combined PAC and TAC meeting, Mr. Markman made a comment, and I apologize for not having the exact verbiage, but he said something to the effect that Searles Valley had a water right by congressional action. Can anybody explain what he meant by that?
And your other question. You have another question?
I do. My other question is on the pumping verification. Can I ask that now, or do I need to do that when Steve gives his report?
Let's do that. Can we hold that one until Steve gets his report? Be glad to answer that question.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure, Mr. Markman's not here, so I'm not sure we can give you an answer for what he said or the context within which he delivered that comment. So maybe we could call him and let him give him an opportunity to respond to your question.
That would be great if you could do that.
Unless you have a different.
I think I do, although the comment I can't imagine is actually what he said, or if it was what came out of his mouth, what he meant to say coming out of his mouth. The question with Searles is when the Navy's reserve right kicks in versus Searles, who was pumping around the same time. And there is a question as to when the Navy's right would become superior to Searles, and that is in part based on congressional action of the Navy getting its right, if you're following me.
Yes, I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I think it's a good question. I think it deserves explanation or amplification from Mr. Markman, because he made the comment, and he may have had some other things he was considering while he was making the comment. So
I will go back and listen to the meeting and get the exact verbiage of what he said.
Thanks. Perfect. And I think you don't have to come here to make that comment. You can write him a letter and info this board, or ask him directly and info this board, and we can have that question answered.
I think I could add that Searles has submitted us a letter, I believe, in November on this point. So, I mean, there's about a 2-page, 3-page letter from Tom Bunn, which explains what this issue is. Well, yeah. And to also clarify, Mick, what Keith was saying is we should not be having members of the public just sending things to Jim Markman, because he's already gotten some of that, and I've seen his email response, which was not giving anybody legal advice that's not my client. So it needs to come through us. And if you still have questions after reading the Cyril's submission letter, you know, please follow through and we can maybe support or answer that question more for you.
Okay. And you want me to hold the other question until?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, the public, unless that spurred other thoughts. Okay, the public comment session is closed. Let's go to the consent agenda. We have 3 items, approve minutes, approve expenditures, 2 items. And I'm opening up for public comment on the consent agenda. If anybody has an issue, we can ask a member of the board to pull it off the consent agenda. If not, we will bring it back to the board. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for comment, review, and a motion.
I have no comment, but I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Page.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Because Mr. Page is on the phone, we have to do everything by roll call today.
Can we have a roll call, please? Thanks, Bob.
Director Kaczynski,
You're welcome.
Aye.
Chairman Gleason,
Yeah. Yes.
Vice Chair Heyman,
Aye.
Director Vallejo,
Aye.
Director Page.
Aye.
Item number 5, first reading of ordinance 01-20 requiring the installation of, use of, and reporting on metering equipment for groundwater extraction facilities in the Indian Wells Valley groundwater basin. Over to you, Mr. Counsel.
Thank you. This is the first read of an ordinance, which means it will be coming back for second read and final adoption. This isn't for adoption today. It's more for public information. The staff report on it's pretty simple, and I'll just highlight it. Any GSP, especially ours, the accurate measurement of water is important and critical to the GSP, and in fact, funding this organization moving forward. What this is going to require is in fact, we know what's coming out of wells. So we've got first a water meter on them, and then we're going to have a backup hour meter in this ordinance to make sure, because it's a mechanical device and it does fail, that you have accurate reporting. This is I won't say required. It is allowed by Sigma for us to do these metering for obvious reasons. The cost of paying for the meters is required by Sigma to be by those that own the extraction facility. So we followed through with that. I believe that's really it as far as the staff report. I can go into more details if anybody has any questions.
Does this require a vote?
Today, we need to read the ordinance into the record, the title, waive the rest of it, and move forward for it to be moved at the second reading in March.
So we don't need to vote today?
I
on
would
the
read
reading.
it. The recommendation is to read it, make CEQA findings, direct staff to provide it to the PAC and TAC members so they can individually comment on it. Don't really need to have a meeting for that. They should individually comment in writing to us, and then you're going to read the title. I can read the whole recommendation if you want, just so you have a simple motion.
Let's do that, but I want to listen to the, let's have the reading, let's listen to the public, and then let's do what we got to do. Are you going to read it?
Oh, you want me? Oh, after the public. Okay. So here's the staff recommendation is make finding that the proposed ordinance is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to Section 1523 of the CEQA guidelines and Public Resource Section 21080 because it's for the establishment of fees for operational charges. Additionally, it's determined that this action is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to 15061B3 because it can be seen with certainty that this action will not have a significant effect on the environment. And it is also determined that this is exempt from further CEQA review pursuant to Guidelines Section 15378B5 because it involves administrative activities that will not result in a direct or indirect physical changes to the environment. We're asking that you direct staff to provide the TAC and PAC members with these standards, this ordinance and well standards that are being developed by Stetson. We have a draft right now that we'll get out for individual written comments by the members. In order to receive proper attention, we would like that all of these comments be received by the Water Resource Manager by March 5th, And then we need to introduce this ordinance by reading it aloud. Its title, it is Ordinance 01-20, requiring the installation of, use of, and reporting on meter equipment for groundwater extraction facilities in the Indian Wells Valley Basin. And I'll just say one quick thing. These meter standards will be adopted by resolution in March. They're going to essentially point out what is a meter, list of manufacturers, some installers, and some accuracy testers.
Thank you, Mr. Council. And let's open up for public comment. Anyone in the public wishing to make comment?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Don Decker, for the record. I would like to make a suggestion that the appropriate AWWA and NIST standards for meter accuracy be referenced, in other words, incorporated within the ordinance as a reference rather than having some sort of supplemental material. And there is no reason to actually create any new standards whatsoever. They exist and have for a long, long time. All you need to do is reference. It also makes no sense to state an accuracy standard without saying what the flow rate that the meter is being tested at. That's just a technical detail, but it plus 3% accuracy doesn't do anything without specifying the flow rate. It also needs to be recognized that there is both the possibility of a over metering and under metering. In other words, it's a plus or minus number. Those are my suggestions for you, and I will put that into writing.
Thank you, sir.
Larry Mead. Did I hear you say that you're going to put an hour meter and check it against the meter?
Yes.
Have you really looked into that? Because if you're going to check the meter, you want to check the power meter against it, not an hour meter, because most of those pumps are run by variable speed panels. How in the world are you going to check an hour meter against a variable speed panel when you're running against a flow meter? It's not going to work.
Thank you, Mr. Mead. We'll take that for action.
I want to, Steve, you're going to answer.
Mr. Mead, you talk to me.
I'm not talking to you.
Then you don't talk to this
You
board,
don't
sir.
understand what I'm saying.
I'll refer your question. You want to give him the answer? Steve?
I can.
Please do. Please do.
it after. Sure. The problem we've run into as far as using the power meters, which is a valid way, but it's a very valid way to check your water meters, is you use your power meters, is that we're finding up here in a lot of places like this, we find that the power meters are hooked up with a lot of different power sources. Only a few of the wells actually have dedicated power meters, so it's very hard to do. We will use those when we can, but what we're trying to use the hour meter for is as a backup should the meter totally fail. There's a testing process in there that's periodically testing these meters, but should it actually fail completely, which is highly unlikely, to at least have an hour meter to show how and when the well was run, and then correlate that with the flow rates that we already have on record. So the methods you're talking about, very valid. We're going to use those, but this is just a backup should a meter fail.
Yeah, but your hour meter speed can't adjust to the flow rate.
Mr.
The variable speed panels, they adjust to the flow rates on demand.
And we will use those when we can, but we just found out that there's not that many wells out here that have dedicated power meters, and they have other sources. Very hard to break it down.
Thank you, Mr. Mead. That was a quality comment. My suggestion is that in order to keep this show on the road, what we'd like to do is coordinate the activities, and I need to do that, so it's my responsibility. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate your comments. Thank you, sir. Next up.
Renee Westalosk. I live in Ridgecrest city limits. Okay, on this ordinance, it's requiring everyone except those exempt, which are de minimis water users and federal entities. My question has to do with if you're not a private well owner, but there is a well and it does residential landscape watering, will they be, and they're not owned by one homeowner, it's not a single residence well, will they be required to prove their de minimis? And I don't know how you would go about that. It has to do with the homeowners association.
Thank you, Mrs. Westlock. Counsel.
It's an interesting question, and we can address it if you can give us a more definitive rather than abstract example. We can give you an answer once we get that presented to us. I'm not sure I know enough of the facts right now from what I'm hearing. I will add this too. We are stuck with the definition of de minimis by Sigma that no court has ever dug into all of these abstracts. And while I'm commenting, I will also point out this whole question of hour meters and that there is a special circumstances provision in here. And if you don't believe that a simple hour meter is going to accurately represent a second metering device for you, you can ask for an exemption from the water resource manager or the authority and get that through rather than having just an hour meter for your second.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Okay, so should I write down the whole thing and send you the situation?
That would be helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Renee.
Elaine Mead again. This isn't my second question.
It's okay.
But if the meter is going to be used to figure what you owe, doesn't that have to be certified by weights and measures, like a gas pump or a scale in a market or those type of measuring devices?
Good question.
Yes, and that's why there's also a requirement to have it tested and sealed
So it will
by
be
an authorized tester.
it will be through weights and measures?
Well, it will be through an authorized meter tester. We have meter testers that have been authorized that are qualified and authorized to do this type of testing. Our goal is to try to get a good baseline. We know that most of the non-de minimis wells out there have meters on them. We just don't know much about most of those meters or when the last time they were tested. And with the amount of water being used, being tied to fees, it just was felt that it was very important that we try to be as accurate as we can. So the goal is to try to get them all tested in the first year and then test periodically after that to make sure they stay accurate by an authorized tester outside.
I'm not sure that answers your question.
No, they didn't.
But I think it gives you satisfaction that they'll be tested properly. Yep. I don't have an answer to your question in terms of whether or not weights and measurements is going to get involved in this and measuring the meter, but I'm going to find out for you.
Yeah, that's my question, because usually anything that is measured, no matter what measurement, is certified through weights and measures.
Right.
So that's...
We'll get on that.
Okay.
We'll get on and we'll get back to you.
Thank
Is that
you.
satisfactory?
Yes, thank
Thanks.
you.
Appreciate it.
Stan Rotora, and I'm speaking for myself. I was just curious, on a cooperative well system where there's 4 or less wells, does that require 4 meters or the number that anyway are being used, or is there only going to be 1 meter? And how does all that work? It's not clear to me how you can use 1 meter on that well when you've got 4 users and one might be using, who knows? So does your ordinance account for
Good
multiple
question.
meters on a well, or just a meter on a well, and then how do you figure out who's using what?
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead.
So your question, we have to take a step further back in your question. What you're proposing in your question is a system where you have a shared well. We have addressed this further back when we adopted the GSP fee. A shared well we've thought of and remember, we are having to rely on an imperfect definition in Sigma of de minimis extractor. We have taken the position that a shared well is 4 different people using that facility, which means it's 4 different extractors. If in a scenario you have 3 people using that well for residential purposes, and the 4th person is using it for agricultural purposes, that 4th person is not a de minimis extractor, and therefore that person's must have a meter for its extractions.
Yeah, that makes sense, but then how do you know it still seems like it's not a complete answer, because you need to make sure that in my mind it should be the well as de minimis rather than the people, but nonetheless you still have to verify that the other people are using less than 2 acre-feet, right? I mean,
You would think so, but de minimis extractors, as defined in Sigma, we cannot meter. They're excluded from the metering provisions. So if you're a de minimis extractor, you don't have to have a meter. Now, if we find somebody who we think is using 10 acre-foot at their house because they've got, football field and whatever else they have out there, we can go and through a regulation make sure they are in fact de minimis. But if it's just 3 homes and they're pretty obviously de minimis extractors using less than 2 acre-foot on each home, and the 4th person using that well is growing something, then that 4th person's the one that's going to have to meter. How that particular well sharing agreement works out for them to come to some agreement on as to what the measurement is, I believe is going to be off each pipeline. But that is, again, one of those special circumstances that we will work with to make sure it works for that situation.
am I correct in assuming that if there are 4 users, they could all be de minimis if the well is pumping less than 8 acre-feet a year?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, so the proposed action is to make a finding, proposed ordinance is exempt from further environmental review, direct staff to provide TAC and PAC members with the draft groundwater well flow meter standards for comment no later than March 5th, introduce attached ordinance by reading aloud its title. So we read aloud its title already?
Yes, we have.
Do we need a vote for all the other 3 items? Mr. Counsel?
Yes.
Okay, so I need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I just had
yes, please.
I had one question / suggestion. On the 6th page of the draft ordinance, in Article 3, meter testing, reports, and repairs. This is more directed at legal counsel and staff who would have to implement this ordinance. I noticed above at the metering equipment requirements, we specifically referenced the groundwater well flow meter standards that apply to those metering equipment requirements. But down in the meter testing, we don't expressly refer to the groundwater well flow meter standards, which I understand is going to be adopted pursuant to a resolution concurrently with the adoption of the ordinance. I'm wondering at the end of that first section of meter testing, where it says, shall be checked for accuracy by a person qualified to test, repair, and install meters, if we feel comfortable that it's clearly covered within the groundwater well flow meter standards, or if we should add that clause to the end of that sentence to avoid an argument that someone says, well, I know how to test and I'm qualified, and here's my test results.
I think we were covered, but I'm fine to make that addition too.
I say let's make the addition. I think it's a good idea. We'll just further qualify it. And how does that read, John?
So at the end of Article 3, Section 1, after the word meters, we would add, in conformance with the authorities then adopted groundwater well flow meter standards, period.
Did we get that? We got that? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm fine with that. Personally, I'm fine with that myself, but it depends upon
Actually,
board.
sorry, it should be actually, because the second one is It should be at the end of both of those sentences, because the first sentence refers to the actual accuracy test, and go ahead.
I think maybe if we put between accuracy and both of those sentences, the in accordance with the adopted. So all metering equipment shall be checked for accuracy in accordance with the then adopted groundwater flow by August 1.
Yeah, that would make sense to me. Both of them.
So
That covers both. Okay.
And I think we could do that. We should probably just do that any time in this section we've got accuracy. Just if we're going this far, let's really lay it down. So section 2, we've got metering equipment accuracy in accordance with.
I'm okay with that.
So.
Okay.
Yep.
So we need a motion or further discussion.
I just want to point out that the ordinance itself that I have in my packet is noted as ordinance 20-01 rather than 01-20. That's a typo, I guess. Be correct?
Yes, it's typographical.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Chairman, I had a question. This is Bob.
Mr. Page, go ahead.
Phil, if any changes are made to the language of the ordinance after today, do we have to reintroduce it?
That depends if they're substantive or typographical of nature. I haven't heard anything substantive today, but if something comes up substantive for TAC or PAC, we would reintroduce and make that substantive change then.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Page.
Are you looking for a motion to approve the recommendations as made? I so move.
We have a motion.
Did that motion cover my requested changes? Okay. I'll second.
We have a motion and a second, and now we need a roll call vote.
Director Kosinski,
Yes.
Chairman Gleason.
Yes.
Vice Chair Heyman,
Yes.
Director Vallejo,
Aye.
Director Page.
Yes.
Moving on to item number 6, Capital Core Group contract extension.
Okay, I'll refer to the staff report in your packet. Just briefly, at the January 16th board meeting, your board was presented with a report from Capital Core draft report that was intended to go to the Secretary of Navy. There have been some revisions to that. This is looking for funding from the Defense Department's Defense Communities Infrastructure Program, DCIP. The board has given Capital Core direction to continue to advocate for funding through that program. Also at that January 16th meeting, the board was presented with a task list, a schedule, and a budget from Capital Core Group for continuing that advocacy on behalf of the DCIP. The issue that's come up is their contract is set to expire March 21st of this year. And the work that would be required to continue for advocacy for that program will extend beyond March 21st. So Capital Core has proposed that their contract termination date be extended to the end of 2020, December 31st, 2020. May or may not require all that time. Also, another request is to be able to transfer funding within the proposal that they submitted originally. There were 4 tasks. Task 2 was to look for, seek alternative water sources. Task 3 was the water advocacy. So to transfer funds from Task 2 to Task 3 to continue to do this advocacy, Director Page had sent a question earlier in the week asking what that amount would be. Capital Core's response was it's an only estimate at this time because, again, going forward, they're not sure how much will be required. But the initial, based on the revised schedule and the revised budget, $36,775 would be transferred from Task 2 to Task 3. So, again, that's money transferred internally within the contract. There's no additional funding to be added. And the contract, as Director Page pointed out, does provide for the Groundwater Authority's general manager to have for the board to delegate to the general manager the ability to transfer funds between the tasks. So the recommendation from staff for this item: as your board has approved Capital Core Group to continue to advocate the DCIP funding for a future infrastructure project for an augmented water supply for the Indian Wells Valley at the January 16th meeting, staff recommends the board approve extending the current contract with Capital Core Group to December 31, 2020, with no change to the amount of the contract. Capital Core Group also requests and staff recommends approval for the internal transfer of funds from Task 2 to Task 3, again with no effect on the contractual amount.
Thank you, Mr. Zadila. Let's open it up for public comment.
Renee Westalesk, I would approve this change. I think it's worth having them advocate for us with the Defense Community Infrastructure grant money.
Thank you, ma'am. Did I see Dave walk up? Was he going to come to this thing? I don't think he was. Oh, he walked out. Okay. Okay, seeing no further comment from the public, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for comment and action.
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I just want to be clear, there's no change in the total amount of the contract. You're just moving money. And as general manager, you have the option to do that without it being written into this change of service agreement. Basically, the service agreement is only going to change the date.
It's just going to change the date, correct?
Okay, and the authority already exists to allow them to move from money from one section to the other. Okay.
Right.
But no additional cost. It's just
Correct.
moving. Okay.
Any other thoughts from the board? If not, I'm looking for a motion.
A motion to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote.
Director Kaczynski?
Yes.
Chairman Gleason?
Aye.
Vice Chair Heyman?
Aye.
Director Vallejo?
Aye.
Director Page?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving right along, we're at the consideration of action opposing the Highway Geothermal Leasing Area Project Final Environmental Analysis, FERC number 14991-000.
Okay, again, there is a staff report on this and information related to it in the packet. On January 23rd, 2020, the Bureau of Land Management issued a news release announcing availability of the final environmental impact statement for the Highway Geothermal Leasing Area Project. The project involves the proposed leasing of 22,800 acres of BLM managed lands in Rose Valley within the watershed of the Indian Wells Valley for exploration and possible development of geothermal resources. The concern on behalf of the Groundwater Authority is that previous studies, there was a study done on behalf of Coastal Operating Company back in 2006 by Brown and Caldwell that cited anywhere between roughly a little over 2,000 acre feet to upwards of 5,000 acre feet of annual recharge. The report concluded or stated that an average of 2,053 is what they used in the model of inflow from Rose Valley into the Indian Wells Valley. Stetson has done some work for the GSP, and I'm sure Steve will chime in here, but their modeling indicated about 2,400 acre feet of recharge coming in from Rose Valley. That 2,400 acre feet is included in the 7,650 acre feet of annual recharge to the Indian Wells Valley. So the concern obviously is what impact development of geothermal resources within that area would have on that inflow. Not necessarily, the Water District Board discussed this, and our board's position is it's not necessarily against the exploration or development, or we want to support the economy of Inyo County, but the concern is we don't have enough information on what the impact is going to be on inflow to the Indian Wells Valley, and we're basing our GSP, our requirement for imported water, augmented water supply on that 7,650 acre feet. So if that is found to be impacted by the work, the geothermal work development in Rose Valley, it obviously will have could have a very significant impact on our situation here, on our recharge, which would mean we'd be looking for additional water sources beyond what we have in the GSP. And that's obviously going to have a significant financial impact on our basin as well. So at this point, the Water District Board directed our staff for the Water District to submit a letter. There is a 30-day window that started on January 24th to submit letters of protest. So that 30 days is up after this weekend. So the window is tight if the Groundwater Authority wants to take any action. My understanding is Kern County has written a letter and already submitted it. So our staff recommendation to the board is with publication of the notice availability in the Federal Register on January 24th, a 30-day protest period commenced. Both Kern County and Indian Wells Valley Water District have indicated intent to submit protest letters. As I said, Kern County actually submitted a letter already. The Water District would submit it today. Staff recommends your board direct staff to submit a letter of protest requesting a study modeling be conducted to determine the impact of new geothermal development on the natural recharge within the Indian Wells Valley watershed.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Let's open it up for public comment and review. Anybody in the public wishing to make comment on this item?
Judy Decker, Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District Representative. I would like to point out to you that when the original COSO geothermal facility was built, it was touted as being able to use all of the immediate local water up in the COSOs. A short time went by before the hayfields in Rose Valley were purchased and water is being piped from Rose Valley up to that facility. It is imperative that this organization, as representing all of the residents in the Indian Wells Valley groundwater basin, fight for our natural recharge. The mission of our Navy base is imperative to the country, and in order to continue, water is needed.
Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Lori Wagner. I wasn't going to say anything, but boy, I just can't contain myself. This idea of taking water by BLM agreeing with COSO, which takes water from us, I have one question. As you all know, we have a plan put in place. It's BLM they're dealing with. Is that not right? BLM land? Who owns the land BLM is messing with? Who owns that? Is that not federal public property? Yes, it is. Think about it, because this doesn't just stop right here. This goes all up and down the east side of the Sierra Nevadas here. Who gives BLM the authorization to make any agreement on any water on federal public property owned by the people of the United States? Think about it. I don't know that there's anything you can do, but this is happening all up and down, and you of the Owens Valley know that, but you're not addressing it and have never addressed it from that particular aspect or level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner. Seeing no one else, we'll close the public session and bring it back to the board for comment and consideration.
Can I enter a comment?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So the Haywee geothermal leasing is basically akin to a zoning change, as the county might be, to use common term. It's basically asking the question, should we change this particular area to even consider leasing? The actual action of drilling wells and putting a plant in is akin for kicking down the road, basically. It doesn't authorize any new plants or anything like that. It's just, would we basically rezone this particular piece of land to consider taking industry's money for a lease? And so that's really the extent of it. I think folks are looking for, do we know where every drop of water comes from? Those studies, it's been explained to me, come at a later time when something is actually proposed, what scale and what technology would be used, that those questions just aren't answered at this level of planning. This is resource management planning level, which is akin to a county zoning plan. So just wanted to make that known, and I understand this. I've been here about a year, at this BLM office, and this has been going on for a long time. So, it's I don't think it's been a secret, but we're certainly, there's an administrative process for the protest, and you can certainly follow that.
Thank you, Tom.
No, I believe my recommendation is, because Don has already stated that the Indian Wells Valley Water District submitted a letter to effect today, right? And what we're asking for is a further study to find out if it affects our recharge, as we said. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle, and we need to know that. And so I agree with this.
Thank you, Ron. I got a couple questions for you, Tom. I understand that no, it's not a secretive issue. You've had public hearings, you've had public meetings, you've complied with regulations. My issue is the fact that this is happening. The possibility, not the reality, but the possibility of this exploration turning into development, it would have a disastrous impact on this basin. The 2,000, if Mr. Stetson, Mr. Johnson is correct, 2,400 acre feet, that's a third of our recharge. So I consider it a threat. And the fact that this is happening, and although you've done due diligence in your public process, I was shocked when I heard about this. So my concern is, I was surprised and shocked at both Inyo County and at BLM, because we were not, our job here is to protect and manage develop a GSP to protect this community and to manage and to control, develop our future. The fact that this was happening on the perimeter, and we have people sitting up on this dais who are representing this, it tells me that we're not communicating. There's an issue with communication that, although the public process has been completely complied with and there's no argument there, I just think that there's a responsibility for all of us to improve our communications. What do you think about that, Tom?
I think we can certainly do that. And, I will say that this project is run out of our district office, and so perhaps there's a miscommunication or a lack of communication that can easily be fixed.
How do we fix that?
Well, we start by asking the question back to I can ask the district, in what capacity were you consulted? And, and of course, we can get you on the list of future actions and maybe make a better effort to reach out to the county.
We're a brand new organization, and I got it. And this is, an established routine that all public agencies go through. So whatever help you need in getting this board more information from BLM in terms of plans of exploration or any efforts to manage your properties that would have a positive or negative impact on this basin, I think it's imperative that we know at the earliest possible opportunity and have an opportunity to contribute to those conversations. Inyo, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Inyo County was aware of this, and we did present this issue to our board. I'll step back and say, whatever this board wants to do today, Inyo is not going to oppose. We're okay with the idea of looking more closely at the potential for significant impacts to the water resource and water recharge to this valley. But what we understand the current project from the BLM to be is essentially a programmatic EIR, allowing for the potential of specific projects to be proposed and applied for, at which point in time any specific application would have to go through its own environmental analysis to ask the specific questions that we're looking at here today with concern. Will this affect the groundwater resource? Will this affect the surrounding ecology and environmental issues up in that Rose Valley, Little Lakes area? We obviously, but we already have the COSO geothermal plant, which had its own environmental analysis run through to make sure that its operations weren't going to have a significant detrimental impact to the Little Lakes Valley environment. And my understanding is that the vast majority of the available groundwater is already allocated to that project with thresholds and triggers in place to prevent significant impacts from occurring based on the COSO operation. So essentially, Inyo County is waiting for an actual project to be proposed before we have any sort of position that we take, whether that project should move forward or not. We're okay with the general concept of the possibility of geothermal energy development being looked at and proposed in that area. We're not necessarily okay with any particular project being approved for that area. So it may be a little bit premature to demand additional studies, given that there is no specific project in front of the BLM. But if this board wants to send that protest letter and demand that, we're not going to oppose that.
Thanks, Ms. Vallejo.
So my concern is, based on the seriousness of the lack of available water supply to this basin, the fact that Inyo is willing to look at it as a possibility, but not look at the possibility of assisting us to get water to this basin is a worry to me. We're on a very limited availability of getting water. I think this should cease and desist before it ever gets started. That's where I stand on it.
Just to make the record clear, we're not opposed to water being imported here. I tried to make that very clear last time. We're just opposed from the DWP project perspective. But
unless I hear things wrongly, I hear it as not one drop or one molecule will come out of Inyo County. So I do hear what you have to say, and the question is, and I'll state it again, is you have an openness, or presenting an openness to look at this and possibly see it as a future project, which is fine, but we have a limited amount of water recharge coming in this basin. And so to possibly affect 2,400 acre feet of our water coming in is a real serious issue at hand here. So it's not like we have a lot of water up there, or we have other sources, or you're making BLM's making availability of BLM water from further north, as Mrs. Wagner stated. We take water from other federal public lands and offset it to us. I'm looking out for the best interest of this valley, the citizens of this city, in this county, the little bit of Inyo that's up there, the little bit of San Bernardino. So it does concern me about what I'm hearing here in this whole big picture, not just your position on it or Inyo's position. I know it's not you specifically, but what concerns me is the whole start of this process. It's an approval. We know what approvals do. Big money lends to other decisions being made once that hurdle's over. So I think it's important as a board that we don't get to that point.
Yeah, I think your comments highlight our position in the sense that at this point we're just talking academically about what's possible, not about a specific project and actual tangible concerns regarding a specific project's potential effects. So to the extent that a specific project would have that detrimental impact, I'm sure Inyo County would have a strong position on whether that project should go forward or not. But for example, if a typical geothermal power plant production drew water from well below the aquifer that might be providing recharge to the Indian Wells Valley, and we can have scientific evidence and facts to show that there's not going to be any potential effect on the flow of groundwater from north to the Indian Wells Valley, Inyo would be okay with that. in a theoretical situation there. So what I am just trying to say is that unless and until there's a specific project with an actual potential impact, we don't have a position on whether or not something should go forward. But we're open to the idea of an application being filed and the environmental studies that would thereby be required being undertaken to give us an idea of what could potentially be affected by a particular and specific project, as opposed to having this academic discussion about study everything because anything's possible. So that's the difference in our where we're talking about at this point. But I think we have common interest in making sure that the recharge to this valley is protected.
Mr. Hammond, you done?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Ms. Kaczynski.
I have a question. So what I'm hearing is this was just triggered automatically by BLM. There was no request from anybody planning a project. That seems odd to me. It seems like somebody must have stepped forward and is planning something up there in order for this to take place. Is that a true statement? There's no project being considered here?
We actually opened this basically a planning amendment at the resource management planning level in response to 3 applications for geothermal processes. So there are 3 applications which generated this plan amendment. Okay. So that's what it's in response to. And so the question is, because right now the area is not open to leasing. You know, and leasing is basically protecting a certain acreage for a particular proponent, leaseholder, and it gives them some rights to explore it, but it doesn't give them a lot of rights.
So those projects aren't what the BLM's action is today, though?
No, it's really just a matter of would we entertain taking these companies' money and giving them a lease, which is you get to protect, an area that you want to do some exploration. That's the way I understand it. I'm not an expert in the geothermal realm, but I've been around the Bureau for 20 years, and even some oil and gas. And so basically, the question is, will we zone the area so that they can get a lease and pay the federal government for having a lease without actually being able to set up a geothermal plant?
So there's 3 applications.
Yes.
Okay. Which implies to me there's 3 potential projects. So to say that there's no project plan, it is basically a general study the BLM is doing to see if they can open the lease for geothermal is more than that. So if there's 3 applications, that means there's 3 potential projects. At least that's what it means to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Who are the 3?
Who are they? I'm sorry, I don't know. It might be contained in the document.
Thank you. We'll get a handle on that.
Okay.
My comments are this. John, I appreciate your thoughts. I understand INYO's perspective that you're, as that INYO Board of Supervisors is concerned with business development and all that kind of stuff, and you're also get other opinions about working with BLM to get this done. My concern is the fact that we didn't know. I mean, we all have, if this was Kern County digging some geothermal in the middle of our mountains someplace, we would know. Because my interest is as a Kern Board of Supervisor, I have an allegiance there, but I also have allegiance sitting on this board. And I don't know that we fulfilled that allegiance to this board by just sitting here and quoting interests of INYO County. Could you comment on that, John?
I think we're missing the point that I tried to make earlier, that this isn't a specific project at issue. This is just the potential for folks to explore the geothermal resources. And if they explore those resources and decide that they want to actually put forward a project, at that point in time, an actual environmental study specific to the project, specific to the potential impacts that project would have, would be undertaken. And so it may just be a difference of a different threshold of wanting to make everyone aware of what's happening, because from INYO County's perspective, the only thing that's happening is, I think a good analogy is a zone change, where we don't have any actual development in front of the decision makers at this point in time. We have the potential for a development to be in front of decision makers in the future, which would require environmental study. So in terms of communication, I can propose to you and commit to you in this board that to the extent that any future BLM actions that might affect this valley that we become aware of are proposed, We'll make that known at least our board public comment here or board reports. I think for this particular issue, the threshold for our interest wasn't peaked yet because there isn't any specific tangible project put forward at this point in time.
Great. Thank you, John. Appreciate your offer of working closely with us. My concern, let me be articulate as best I can. I understand there was no specific project, but I don't want the camel to stick his nose under the tent. I don't want to get that far, because once we've gotten this far, then there'll be money involved, and then there'll be politics involved, then there will be influence developed for these people to build these projects. And I would much rather, as a board, have an opportunity to respond at the very outset in order to prevent that from happening. Personally, if Mal didn't go to the meeting that was held by BLM, I wouldn't have known about it like 2 or 3 weeks ago, whatever it was. And it was a surprise to me, and there was a chance that this could have gotten past the county and maybe even past this board if it wasn't for the water district and the county getting this information at the last minute and being able to lodge these protests. So I think that the threat of geothermal development in the Rose Valley, is that the area where it is a significant threat. Even the discussion of that type of development needs to be carefully considered by this board, and this board needs to have, as protectors of our basin, has to have a word, be able to offer our opinion of any of those discussions and developments. So I'm thankful, John, that we were going to work, and Tom, we're going to have closer communication. I wonder if there's any other issues. Go ahead.
I was pointing up, we have Bob Page on the line. He might want comment too. We haven't asked him.
Yeah, but let me. Did you want to say something, Ron? Okay, so I'm just looking for my final question is: are there any other issues out there lurking in the shadows that we don't know about? I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I'm going to scrub Kern County, make sure that we have nothing in there that we're looking at, and if I find something, I'm going to bring it to this board and let us give us an opportunity to professionally, carefully consider it and offer our opinions as to its viability. Mr. Page, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Chairman. And in part, I think I'm going to need some clarification from Phil on one issue, because I appreciate the offers from both BLM and from Inyo County to make sure that they keep us in the loop and potentially put us on an interested party list so we can continue to learn about how this progresses. But as I understand Sigma, and Phil, just correct me if I get any of this wrong, we can't regulate BLM's water use. So I don't know that they had any obligation when they started this process, also given the timing of our GSP being approved just last month, to notify us about this. But I guess my question to Phil is, should this piece of the puzzle, or the step of the process, go forward, and then BLM consider leases and projects from private entities, can the authority, the GSA, regulate the water use of those private authorities on federal land, or would we be precluded still from regulating the water use of those facilities because they'd be using federal water rights?
Mr. Hall.
Yeah, there seems to be a couple things. John was mentioning about boundary issue also. I think they're outside of our basin, which creates a little bit of a problem for us to regulate. There is supposed to be coordination between basins, but that's a problem. And yes, the underlying issue of it is BLM. We are not able to regulate BLM as a federal entity, as with the Navy, is a problem.
So to answer Mr. Page's question, if a project were to ever come in, I know we're a long way from that when this wasn't even the point of the conversation, but if a project were to ever come in, we couldn't regulate it. They could pull as much water as they wanted out of that.
This GSA does not have authority to regulate in a federal entity. Whether or not we had some sort of legal right as just water users in this basin is another issue, and whether you get an injunction, but your ability to actually regulate from this dais is non-existent to the federal entity.
Thanks. The issue for me is we are maturing as an organization. That's just that simple. I mean, we're maturing as an organization. We're evolving, and we're becoming more understanding of our environment and our responsibilities as stewards, and this is part and parcel to being a steward, the best stewards we can. Did you have a thought?
Can I add something here?
Hold on, Tom.
Hank,
could you hold on for a second, Tom?
I can understand where Phil's coming from, that if the BLM decides to do this, there isn't a lot maybe we can do to stop it legally. But I think that the BLM has a responsibility to protect the environment and the resources and how it affects everybody that is around them as well. So that's all. That's what we're out really doing here is saying let's look at this really closely and see how it affects the environment and the resources as it applies to the people that use it. And that's what we're asking.
Thank you, Mr. Kaczynski. Tom.
Sure. With respect to who owns the water under the BLM land, is really the state's authority on most issues regarding to water, except for federal reserve water rights. And those are specifically the ones that are put into laws, such as NAWS has, or maybe with the Wild and Scenic River that has a specific law that says, certain amount of water, particular to the mission, is required. And I'm not aware of that being the case out in Rose Valley. Might want to read the document. I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in that particular document for Haywee, but there might be in the existing environment section of that document, and I would be happy to read it and report back to you guys on that. But it's my understanding that water is generally the state's purview on managing it.
Thanks, sir. John, you had a thought?
Just a couple of things. One, we have a boundary issue because any proposed project, as I understand it, would be outside of the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority's boundary. So it wouldn't be an issue that we could directly regulate, which I think we've established. To the extent that there was a third party that we could regulate, we very well possibly could. For example, if any such proposal is made in that area, there is an Inyo County code provision requiring a hearing before the Planning Commission for any such application to be approved. So any proposed project would go through a subsequent environmental process with Inyo County as well, which obviously would provide an opportunity for this board and other interested parties to participate in as well with regard to the environmental review and whether or not it made sense for Inyo County for other issues as well. So again, if anything like that specific and tangible does come forward, I'll make sure to let this board, give this board a heads up.
Thank you, sir. Closing comments? Anyone else want to comment on this?
Yeah, Chairman.
Mr. Page.
Yeah, the one comment I'd like to make in closing is what I'm hearing in listening to the conversation is BLM and Inyo County both offering to be communicate, to be collaborative on this as the best they can. And I want to be respectful of that and make sure that we're establishing that new communication and that better collaboration on a good foot. I think any of us sitting in our role, if we were sitting on boards for our individual jurisdictions, if someone came to us and said, we demand X, Y, and Z study at this point when you're doing a land use zoning change, we would give them the same answer Tom kind of gave, which is this is just a procedural part of the process to see whether we could consider applications. And if any projects come forward, then that full EIR would happen. I think John mentioned that as well. So the recommendation indicates that we submit a letter requesting that a study or modeling be conducted to determine the impact of geothermal development. I think ultimately, yes, we do want that study. I just want to be cognizant and respectful of BLM's authority that, essentially what we really want is that to be done before any project's approved. I get we don't, Mick, your comment that you want to try to prevent the camel from sticking his nose into the tent, but if somebody came to a Board of Supervisors meeting and asked at some point when the board was considering something that didn't require an EIR at that time because it was more of a procedural, administrative type of action, we wouldn't say yes to doing a full EIR at that point. So I just want to make sure while we're expressing our opposition to the ultimate idea of geothermal projects in that part of the watershed, I want to also be respectful of the authority of BLM and Inyo County to regulate that process and be more of in a position of making sure they understand our position and that we want to make sure we're consulted when they get to that and that they do these kind of things, as opposed to just coming off as, we require that you do that, because we really don't have the authority to require anything right now.
Well said, Mr. Page. Thank you very much for your comments. Anyone else?
Mr. Gleason?
The public has been closed, but we'll reopen it because, Sam, you weren't here when we closed the public, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to come up and speak.
Sophia Merck. Sorry, I was late today. I would like to reiterate that we do have rules in regards to BLM and Inyo County planning. One is covered under NEPA, one is governed under CEQA. And BLM is processing a permit. And the way they do it, they get an applicant, and the applicant puts in a type of plan of operation or whatever they want to do, and BLM goes through the process. That doesn't mean one way or the other that BLM or Inyo County is saying yay or nay. They go through a process, and every fourth Thursday of the month, BLM has a roundtable. We've had this discussion at the roundtable, so many of us were aware of this that was going on. And I would like to cordially invite anybody that has any concerns to come to the next meeting. It's on the 28th. It'll be at 6 o'clock at the BLM office. But BLM and Inyo County are simply doing their jobs. NEPA and the CEQA will regulate what's going to happen, and Kern County can always put their names down to be notified. And as a newly formed agency, GSA can do it also. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. Now, I had closed public.
I know you did, but I have two things that might...
You have 1 minute.
Okay. Two things. The original document was written in 2012 before this organization was formed. The second thing, it says 4 projects in the document. The third thing is you would be sending a protest letter to, it would allow BLM to be aware, at the national level, to be aware of SIGMA and that this valley has a water problem.
Thank you, ma'am. So, as a matter of protocol, and a matter of parliamentary procedure, the public hearing has been closed. And anymore, when we close the public hearing, it's closed. That means you cannot come up and comment. I'll allow these two. This is the last time I allow, after the public hearing has been closed, to allow people to comment. Please.
Thank you, Chairman.
Make it short, please.
Thank you. Yes, it will be short. I did some research a while back. I was just curious of who owns the COSO Thermal, the business entity behind it all. And it was very hard to research that. And I believe what I found was it's an entity in New York City at that time. I understand it's changed hands a number of times. So that would be interesting to know who is the Wizard of Oz back there pulling the strings.
Thank you. Next.
Wes Kassenstein speaking for myself. Thank you for allowing me a few seconds here. 2 quick comments. Whenever we have a cloudy, wet day around this valley, you can see a huge cloud of steam emerging from the coastal geothermal north of here. It uses water. I think the water is vented to the atmosphere for cooling purposes. I do not think it's a closed system. It will use water. I'm very nervous of the concept that we could get water deep and at no risk to the water that might flow into this basin. My other quick comment is, in a very real sense, Rose Valley is part of this basin. If you were to design the basin by where the water flow emanates, there's a little area called Olancha Pass that you drive over with your car when you're heading towards Bishop, and the water, as I understand it, south of Olancha Pass flows into this basin. So in a very real sense, Rose Valley should be part of this groundwater basin. I recognize that Inyo County wrestles with the DWP every day and doesn't want to let DWP even wiggle its little finger because something might change. I understand where you're coming from, but we should bear in mind that in a very real sense, it is part of our basin. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes. Thank you, Wes. Appreciate it. So the action before us is to consider augmenting the two letters that the Water District and the county has put in. I'm going to support that motion, whoever makes that we get on that. And there's a critical timeline, so we better give Mr. Zadiba time to do that. But I'm waiting for other conversation, a motion, and a second.
I just have a question, because there was a comment raised about maybe requiring the modeling or the studying to be done when a specific project is identified. Do you want to amend the letters to reflect that? Or as is?
I mean, I'll comment on that. I think the letter ought to go as is, because it puts us on record. And it may be the fact that once the BLM sees that may be a requirement they take on, and they'll obviously pass it right on through any environmental studies. But I think saying, hey, just if the project occurs, make that happen. I think the letter as written is fine.
Then I'm waiting for a motion.
So moved.
Don, this is Bob. Okay.
Mr. Page, go ahead.
You can get a second, then I'll ask the question. You can get a second first, and then I'll ask the question.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Mr. Page.
Mr. Kaczynski referenced a draft of the letter. I don't recall seeing that in the agenda packet. Is that somewhere that it's available for us to look at?
We've seen it. I don't know if it's in the packet.
The Water District letter is not in the packet.
What was shown okay.
So the answer is we can't find it up here, but I do know and have read the county letter and have seen the Water District letter.
The letter from the Water District was sent to staff and I believe to the GA board as well. It has been changed, I think, since it went out. It's not final. It'll be finalized this afternoon and sent.
I haven't seen one either, but I think I understand that we're trying to model the letter off of what Kern County and the Water District are going to send or have sent.
Discussion among staff is that it would be more modeled after the county letter than the Water District letter. But some of a brief part of the Water District letter was included in the county letter that I read.
Mr. Page, did you have further comments?
Okay. No, and I do have the county letter. I just wasn't sure if there was a specific draft for the water authority that was floating around. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. We need a roll call vote.
Director Krasinski?
Yes.
Chairman Gleason?
Aye.
Vice Chair Heyman?
Aye.
Director Vallejo?
Aye.
Director Page?
Aye.
Water Resource Manager report, item 8.
Thank you, Chairman Gleason. We can get the PowerPoint up. I think there's handouts out front for those who came in for these particular PowerPoints. First of all, good morning, everybody. It's good to see all of you guys again. We had a little bit of a lull with the PAC and TAC meetings being postponed while we finish up the GSP. Okay, here we go. Most of this is updates, but there's information. There's some good information here too, folks. So I thought we'd just run through it. First one is the status of the Prop 1 grant for the GSP. Invoice number 3. It did get delayed a little bit. We are right now probably a full quarter behind in our drafting, processing, reviewing internally, and then getting invoices into DWR along with progress reports that are done quarterly. We got a little bit behind, in all honesty, we got a little bit behind because of the work that it took to pull the GSP together along with all the comments and the responses to comments and get the document pulled together and finalized so it could be submitted. But we decided to prioritize that, 1, because there was a deadline and because it needed to get in, and 2, because as we've mentioned before, the primary person getting hurt with this, getting behind on the invoices to DWR is us. So it's getting payments to us that is primarily affected. But we're going to get back on schedule. So it's going to take a little bit to do that, but we're going to get back on schedule. Invoice number 3, as it says up there, it actually covers April through June. So you can see how far behind we are. The redraft was submitted about a week ago, a little over a week ago, to DWR, so it's in, along with the progress report. It was to submit at the same time. Total payments almost $190,000, and that's good. However, I think you folks may recall that at the previous meeting, General Manager Don Zadiba reported that a prior DWR payment that was due to the Brackish Water Group was actually deposited in the wrong account, and we actually got paid, which was good. We got paid out of that, so there will be some reconciliation going on with this payment. So that's where we are with that one. Invoice number 4, we are working on now. Heather's been working on it for a while. She's indicated to myself and Don that we shall have that invoice and progress payment ready by maybe just after the end of the month, first week of March, to be submitted, so it's coming. We'll have that one pulled together and get that one in. That'll be July through September. So we still have October, November, December, but we're just in February right now. So if we can get this one turned around, we're back pretty much on schedule to get the next invoice, which will be invoice number 4. Associated with that, as you recall, we're working on grant agreement revisions. Most of it has nothing to do with the scope of work or what we're doing or the amount of the grant. It has to do with scheduling of the work that needs to get done. And we've been working on the revisions to the grant agreement with DWR to get that schedule finalized. It's gone back and forth 3 times. Well, we finally come to an agreement on how it's going to be revised, and the letter requesting that formally is now in DWR's hands. So we're waiting for a formal response from DWR, and then we will fully execute the amendment to the agreement and go forward. That extension will extend the Prop 1 agreement to July of 2021, so it's the rest of this year and half of next year. And the primary purpose for that long of an extension is the SDAC work, which is just the next item. There's other things that are being moved back, but it's primarily the SDAC. And key to this, getting the DWR grant agreement extended, is that if we don't get this done pretty quickly, they won't process any more invoices unless the agreement has been extended, because we're coming up to the deadline on the original agreement. So we've got to get that done. So we're working on that. The next PowerPoint really is the SDAC update. I kind of talked about that already. You all recall what the SDAC was. This was to do some work on conservation and leak detection, things like that. The consultants that submitted the proposals on this, they're all still there. They're all still interested. They're kind of on a hold until we, 1, get the grant agreement extended, and 2, have the board review our financial situation and make sure that cash flow-wise it still works. As far as I know, everything's moving forward, but as soon as we get direction from DWR on the grant agreement extension, we'll be bringing back to the board the consultant agreements for the SDAC work. So that's the SDAC. The next PowerPoint has to do with Prop 68, and there's a little bit to report on Prop 68. I'm not sure if it's been reported, because things have been really busy. Things have been going by really fast. I'm not sure what we've reported and what we haven't. We did get a preliminary notification from DWR on our Prop 68 funding request, new grant, that they were conditionally awarding or tentatively awarding $200,000, which is good. That's money they're gonna award. A big chunk of that goes to work that's already been done. Some goes to work going forward. So it helps. It helps with the finances. Some background on that. There was some confusion in the past when we talked about this grant application. When we first looked at the grant application and the requirements to submit a grant under this Prop 68 grant by DWR, we reviewed the grant requirements, the submittal requirements with DWR and DWR staff more than once. Their initial calculations looked like the maximum amount we would be entitled to, the authority would be entitled to, was $200,000. And that's because they associated Prop 68 directly with what was awarded in Prop 1. Okay? So the calculation, there's a total amount between both grants based on the amount you got in Prop 1. Then they give you the gap, allow you to apply for the gap between Prop 1, which was awarded, and the total between Prop 1 and 2 that they will award. Prop 68 award is awarded for completion of GSPs because some other people haven't finished theirs yet, and some implementation of GSPs. So, originally the indication with DWR was $200,000 was the limit. We talked to them several times about the requirements. We brought up several concepts with them about what we were doing and why we were applying. We actually got agreement with DWR staff in writing, in emails in writing, that we were eligible for more on the order of $350,000, 342 change, whatever it was. But it was about $350,000. Internally, because just the way the state works, internally in our office, we decided to prepare that application for more than even DWR staff had indicated we were eligible for. And the purpose for that was, one, DWR changes their mind sometimes, and sometimes they change their mind on what the limits are. Sometimes they extend the limits. Sometimes they make more money eligible. And we were hoping that maybe they would, hearing about our situation, the financial situation we have here, that they might just feel sorry for us and give us more money because they have money available, and the amount being applied for was very close to the total amount available. So our thought was we didn't have there was no downside to us applying for more. We applied for about $750,000. We felt all of it was justified for grant funding, although we were aware of the DWR limits. When DWR made their conditional approval for $200,000, we were very surprised. We've made at least had two or three conversations with DWR staff, same staff that we talked to before, about why they conditionally only approved $200,000. We had a couple of things come up. We actually, I'll just let you know, we did write a letter. The authority did. We drafted the letter. I think Don signed it. But we wrote a letter. Basically, there was a comment period allowed under these conditional approvals. We wanted to make sure we got our comments in before the period ran out. So we did write a letter. It's on the website. You can read it. Two of the things that came up, there's at least two that I want to point out. Two of the things that came up that DWR pointed out that they thought were ineligible in our application had to do with our request for funding for an imported water project. The second one was our request for money for shallow well mitigation work. And they indicated the reason why they weren't eligible, this is what's frustrating with the state, the reason why they said they weren't eligible is because they were included in the Prop 1 grant as part of our GSP. And from a 20,000 foot level, yeah, that might make sense, they were, but from a reality standpoint, it doesn't make any sense at all, because we included it in Prop 1 for a couple of purposes. Imported water was included so that we could study the alternatives available for imported water. We could evaluate cost. We could evaluate water supplies. It was an evaluation process to put into the GSP, because obviously we've discussed this before and all agree we do need imported water. So the purpose of the Prop 1 grant application and the Prop 1 grant funding was to evaluate imported water supplies. That's what it was for. Similarly, the shallow well impacts, the purpose of the Prop 1 grant funding for shallow well impacts was primarily to look at what shallow well impacts are, to evaluate shallow well impacts associated with our groundwater modeling, with our overdraft, with our proposed plan going forward, to look at it. In addition to that, as part of the GSP, we did prepare a shallow well mitigation outline for a shallow well mitigation plan. So that was included. We didn't prepare the plan, as I think we reported to everyone through the TAC. We didn't prepare the plan. We prepared the outline to work on the plan afterward. So in both cases, the application that we made on Prop 68 included implementation of imported water, which is following up with the potential imported water suppliers and further evaluating the facilities that are needed, further evaluating the cost, further evaluating the water supplies that we might need to put into those facilities to bring water this way. It was an implementation side of what was in the Prop 1, which is allowed under Prop 68. For the shallow well mitigation plan, what we applied for under Prop 68 was the implementation of the shallow well mitigation plan, which is development of actually writing the plan, creating the plan, and implementing the plan to evaluate shallow well impacts and possibly mitigate wells, whether it's repairing a well, improving a well, redrilling a well, whatever we needed for the shallow well impact. So from our perspective, it didn't make any sense why they didn't include it. We've included that in the letter. We haven't heard anything back yet. So I hope that helps explain the big gap between the application at 750. There was a point where we recognized that we thought the maximum we might get was 350, and then how they ended up at the $200,000 conditionally approved. I will let you know that there's been other contact. I know Chairman Gleason has been in touch with DWR. We've had internal discussions about making a trip to, Chairman Gleason suggested making a trip to DWR and talking to some higher ups about this. I totally agreed with it because this is very, very important. We need the funding. We need the funding bad. They didn't here. I'm getting frustrated right now. They didn't even give away all the money they had available under this grant, so it doesn't make any sense. But so we haven't given up yet. So that is Prop 68 grant funding status, and we will update you as soon as we know more. Sorry I went so long, but it took a minute. The next PowerPoint, sorry. The next PowerPoint, this is actually the follow-up on portions of the GSP. This is the verification, the outreach for verifying production in the basin for all non-de minimis pumpers. And as you know, this has been discussed over and over again as part of the GSP. We've got a lot of input from many of the pumpers, some of the bigger pumpers, about making sure that you get everybody registered, you get everybody reporting, you get everybody accurate reporting. And if we're going to have assessments associated with pumping, you got to get all the pumping information. You got to make it accurate. So this is a step following the GSP to do further outreach, recognizing folks we know. We already have a lot of information. We have any reports that are at the state board. We have the cooperative group. We have well registration information. We have current reporting and current payments on assessments. We have all that. We recognize that. This is really the formal process to close that outreach on information regarding pumping and pumping verification, so that we can then prepare what we're calling verification of pumping reports, which we intend to do. I've already started. I've prepared an outline. I think I've got the outline to the legal counsel, to Phil, to look at, and my staff to look at the outline. Based on a previous adjudication we worked on, and what goes into a verification report like that. So that's what this is for. I just put up the front page so that it would be a place. Oh, that's a different one. So it would be a placekeeper. And to mention what we're doing and why it's out there. If you have questions, certainly let us know. Prefer to get them in writing, and we'll try to respond in writing. So far, it hasn't been too bad. One of the big questions we got, and I know Elaine has a question. One of the questions we've got is, where did you come up with 1937 and why 1937? It's way so far back. A lot of these people weren't pumping. The primary reason for that, and Phil can make sure I'm right or help me with this, but the primary reason for that really is associated with the Navy facility with China Lake, and we do have a situation where apparently, or it looks like possibly, at least one overlying pumper or one appropriated pumper or whatever. One pumper was pumping before the Navy was there, and so we're trying to go back before that. So if anybody else has something like that, we are complete. So that's why the 1937 is there. Is that good enough?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, got it in there. So I don't know what other questions there might be out there, but certainly send them in. I'll let you know that we sent this out under Water Resources Manager letterhead, my letterhead. It was run through. It was actually prepared between us and legal counsel. What was used for that was outreach similar to that for other adjudications in other areas. Keith Lemieux was very helpful with that to put this together. So there is a basis for what we're putting together and trying to use stuff that's worked before to do this outreach. I've already heard some people have concerns about some gaps. I will tell you this, if you do submit things, make sure you tell us who you are, because one of the things we didn't find is here a place where you say who you are in the questionnaire. And we've gotten at least one in the mail, and we had to look at the postmark to find out who actually submitted it because it was just filling out the questionnaire. So that is a report on the pumping verification outreach that we've done. The next item is, I think, it's kind of more interesting, and this has to do with GSP completion, adoption, and submittal, and the GSA's general schedule going forward. I think staff feels that this is extremely important that we get this information out to you folks to see where the authority is going, where we've been, and where we're going down the road. A lot of this is intended to be fairly firm, but it's also somewhat tentative. But at least it's letting you know where things are going. So we start out with. I think he's ahead of me up there. Can we back up one, please? Oh, yeah. Okay. So the first one really is GSP completion, adoption, and submittal. This just goes back a little bit. It was adopted on the 16th and submitted to DWR on the 30th. I just walked through the verification of non-de minimis pumping on when it went out. Here's the timing, just so you have it. They're due back to the Water Resources Manager by March 1st. We may, based on what you submit, based on what's submitted, we may have questions of what you've submitted, so we may have some outreach back to you what you submit. That's certainly an alternative that we may have to do to get some clarification, so we may do that. We're intending to draft the legal reports, the pumping verification reports, which I described, by no later than April 15th. And have legal review done by then, and then get those out back to everybody who submitted, all the non-de minimis pumpers, to get their comments back by the 30th, at the end of the month, and then bring it back to the board for adoption at the meeting in May. So that's a general schedule on what we're trying to do. And as I mentioned, I've already started the outline. We've got at least some submittals coming out already, so we're working on that. If we can go to the next one. Okay, now the schedule. GSP work task implementation schedule. Metering of non-de minimis wells. This was talked about earlier, so I don't have to go into too much detail, but the first read of the meter ordinance was today, so Phil accomplished that. Would be adopted at the March meeting. Meter ordinance compliance in June, and first meter read period would be the month of June. New pump fees. Now, what the authority is looking at through staff is an administrative augmentation and mitigation pump fee. That's what they're looking at. This is separate from the current pump fee. The current pump fee is going forward while this is being evaluated and pulled together. The Prop 218 engineering report associated with these fees, and this is the document that supports the basis for the fees, why the fees are needed, both with work that needs to be done and the cost associated with getting that stuff done through the authority. The current plan is to have a draft of the Prop 218 engineering report to the PAC for the PAC meeting on the 5th. I'll give you a heads up, that may be moved back. I just talked to David before the meeting as a possibility of the 12th. That didn't sound good, so it may even be moved back a month. That's why I say some of this is tentative. But right now, this is what we had in the schedule. As you know, this was prepared a few days ago. So things are a little bit liquid right now. The board was set, based on that schedule, the board would set a public hearing on new fees at the 19th meeting on the 19th, with the hearing set for May 21st. Send out Prop 1 notices by the end of March. That's to everybody who would apply to. Adopt 218 report and ordinance at the May 21st meeting, be effective in 30 days, with new fees being effective based on the 30 days, June 22nd. So that's all tentative. Things may move back a little bit, but that's just a heads up. Next one. One of the tasks that we've discussed that needs to be accomplished during this process is a preparation of a report on the allocation of the sustainable yield, the 7650. And I started working on that this week. I've got a draft outline of what's going to go in, at least a draft outline of what will go into that report. My staff's looking at it. People, Jeff and Heather and such, are looking at it, and I've sent it to Phil to look at. So we'll get that pulled together. Right now, the schedule for that is a draft report available for the packet the March 5th. Probably not going to happen. Maybe move back. Again, draft report to the board the 19th, and then the allocation report approved on April 16th. So that may move back a little bit, and we'll adjust this and get it out to folks when we make the adjustments. When we make the final decisions, when this was prepared, this was the plan. Things may move back maybe a month, but we'll see. Then we've got adjustment to current pump fee. There is discussion about the financial situation of the authority and maybe have the need to adjust the pump fee until these other fees come into place. Jim may not know I put this in here, Jim Worth, because Jim's responsible for involved with this. That's why it has tentative on the side. But tentatively, legal first read and data package that would be worked on is March 19th. I put a question mark. And adopt a new pump fee by April 16th. So that's just a placeholder. I even added tentative on this one because I wrote it myself and just to try to let people know what the staff and the authorities looking at are thinking about. Okay, so rules and regulations. This is tied to the meter ordinance and meter standards. It's kind of my thought. I haven't really done much work on this. I pulled out some previous rules and regulations just to look at and see how they apply. Organizations like this, if they're going to be, once they become a real management organization, groundwater management organization, we should have a good, complete set of rules and regulations. I've got a set to work from. Just tentative, and the rules and regulations would include things like the meter standards and the requirements on the meters, but it'll include other things like the reporting and everything goes into a set of rules and regulations. It would it would evolve from a lot of the GS policies is what it would end up doing, and you'd have a full set of rules and regs. So we'll decide whether something like that is needed or not through the staff. But here's the tentative schedule was, again, March, and then the 5th, the 19th, and then to the board. Don't think we're going to make that because it just started on those. There's been discussion about, in the GSP, a lot of discussion about a transient pool and the fallowing program. Those are in concept right now. There's no real meat to any of that, but we've got some schedules here about considering when the staff would start working on these programs, draft programs. And the idea is, at least shown here, would be have draft programs available to the PAC in April, maybe to the board at the April meeting, and then possibly adopt in May if we can pull all this together. It's a very aggressive schedule. You have a very proactive chairman right now, moving things along. So we're trying to move things along and get some things done this calendar year. So is there another one? Is that it? I think that's it. And I think, let me just check my notes. Let's see. I don't think I have anything. I think that covers it. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnson. Let's open it to the public and let's hear what you have to say.
Good afternoon again. Mr. Gleason, my question was concerning the 1937.
I knew it.
Okay. And after listening to Steve, I have a little more of a question about it. When you mentioned Cyril's Valley, I think you called them an overline user, an appropriator, and an exporter. Can you explain what you classify them, or are you waiting for them to fill out this package and classify themselves?
Thanks for the question.
It would be the second. I have my thoughts, but yes, when I'm sorry.
Let's get a legal definition on Cyril.
Steve is right. We are not making any determinations right now about anybody's water right. They can tell us what their legal water right is.
Okay, then my other question is still about the 1937. What little research I've done, Cyril's Valley was there long before 1937, and the base didn't come in until the 40s. So I still don't understand the 1937 date and the significance of it.
Do we have any clarification we can offer?
Sure. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. This is going to be in some of the documents in the future, but this is a theoretical legal argument that would assert that the Navy's the Navy's Federal Reserve right, if it started in 1943, when the base came in, that anybody who was challenging that was saying that they had a higher right than that, if they were an appropriator, needed to be appropriating and pulling water out of the basin 5 years before 1943. Because an overlying right and a Federal Reserve right are going to be higher than an appropriative right unless you get into a prescriptive period, and a prescriptive period is 5 years. So that's why you go back 5 years from 43, which would be 38. We gave ourselves 1 year of leeway.
Thank you. Very complex issue. We're going to get deeper into that as we go along.
I think it would have been helpful had that been noted in here somewhere. I've had a lot of people scratching their head wondering where did 1937 come from.
Thank you. Good
Thank
point.
You. Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the Water Resources Manager as PAC Chairman. When do you expect that we'll be able to make the decision on the 5th or the 12th, or postponing a month or another option?
Good question, David. I appreciate it, because I told you to remind me if I didn't talk about that. But specifically, in my view, and Phil can jump in, I think we should be able to make it by next week for sure.
Okay, the issue, in my mind, and we set some bad precedents last year with getting meaty information presented to us and seeing it for the first time at the meeting.
Yep.
These are very meaty topics as well, obviously, and we've targeted that we would have them available no later than the Monday preceding a Thursday PAC meeting, and that timeline if it's a different day. Can we hold to that for our ability to have sufficient review time for the members to get that, and additionally making the decision far enough advance that folks can modify their schedules? When Steve and I talked before the meeting, I said I know there are several that have conflicts the week of the 12th.
Yeah.
On that day, and it may not be that we can get a quorum. I have a conflict, for example, that day. So we need to know well enough in advance to be able to get a quorum and to be able to have sufficient review time.
Answer is yes. I appreciate you making a point of that, and I have made the same point. And if we do move it back, it gives us a little more time, but the goal would be to make sure that you get it no later than the Monday before that meeting. And in addition to that, discussion at the meeting, having reviewed the topic and discussion at the meeting, we wouldn't expect you to have your comments all in by then either. So there would be time to get comments back to us after the meeting.
Understand, and given your draft schedule, I suspect that the push date is getting our inputs in time to support a decision meeting at the GA.
Correct.
So that's where we need as much coordination ahead of time and are available as we can.
We are aware of that, and we're going to try to get you that 3 days in advance. We're committed to that. We're also committed to meeting a schedule and getting things moving, because there are downstream consequences to delays that we want to avert if possible, but we're not going to forfeit a quality decision or a quality recommendation.
Right. Thank you, David.
Mr. Hall.
I would just add one thing. The engineer's report is almost all information you've already seen. It's just now put together in a different type of report, because we've already seen the import studies, the mitigation studies, et cetera. Those are just now included in this report, and decisions on fees are based, therefore, off those.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Come on up. I forgot your name, Judy, but now I remembered it.
Thank you. Judy Decker, Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District. I echo what David said. In your PowerPoint presentation, you have given the PAC committee a lot of work to do. Hopefully we don't need it all done on the same night. Otherwise, we better start our night meeting at 6 a.m. in the morning. Please give us ample time to study these serious documents carefully. And along those lines, I have a question. And my question is about the implementation of charging the non-de minimis user. You have a questionnaire, and there's many of us who come to your meeting every month. There's probably many people who read your website every month, but how are you going to ensure that all of the de minimis users, all of the non-de minimis users receive this questionnaire? And how do you know that you have them all? I think that's a question that you need to address, perhaps not today, but you need to think about it, because most ordinances have in them where they regard fees. If you don't pay the fee, for instance, if you don't pay your monthly water district bill in a timely fashion, you get charged a delinquent charge. So if you have people that are out there who don't fill this out because they didn't know about it, how are you going to deal with that?
All valid questions. And we're going to come up with some answers. We don't have all the answers right now. It's a straight and skinny of it. Anybody else wanting to speak? Because we could save time if everybody moved to your right. Go ahead, Camille.
Camille Anderson, Searles Valley Minerals. I just had a question on the WRM report on allocation of sustainable yield. What is that report?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes. It's basically an evaluation of the sustainable yield and who would have priority to pump that sustainable yield. So it's kind of it's a engineering evaluation of the rights associated with that pumping that we're aware of, that would also go through legal review. And it's going to be used, part of the reason for that, the report is it's going to be used to determine who might be applicable to the fees that we're also talking about going forward.
Okay. I just have a question then about your timetable. Because you say you're going to have a draft report available March 5th. Mm-hmm. The questionnaire is not due until March. You would like it before March 1st. Right. I'm assuming you're using information from the questionnaire in your report. Is that correct?
We're using all the information that we have. If we do get some reports in, yes. This schedule, like I said, is tentative. It will likely be moved back a bit. That is likely to happen. Right now, we have a pretty good idea of the allocation of the safe yield, of where it's going to go. So much of that can be done even right now, because we have the Navy, we have we have de minimis, and we have some other categories that we can put together.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Camille.
Can I ask a follow-up? Sure. With regards to that question...
State your name, please.
Dave Janis, PAC Chair. Thank you, sir. With regard to that, we had a discussion on the phone yesterday about this and what the tasking might be for the 5th. And on that specific topic, the allocation safe yield, what I requested was that we have what is the specific tasking for review by the PAC of an engineering report, so that we can, and getting to Judy's question, so we can get to focus the discussion, the review, and getting something productive back to you.
Specific task, yes.
Yes.
Chairman, if I can answer a question inside both of those questions and give a little more explanation of what this initial report is. This initial report is really going to be focusing on what is our belief of allocations to those that we cannot regulate as the GA. BLM, de minimis users, and the Navy. And I believe once, with the numbers we have now, and we're going to come closer to that determination, but I might be the whole safe yield. If it's not, then we need to know that as we're moving forward. But that is sort of a separate issue from the questionnaire, because frankly, I can't make the Navy even fill out the questionnaire, or BLM, as we've already seen today.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the conversation. Very productive. Mr. Water Resource Manager, are you through?
I'm done. Thank you, Chairman.
Do we need a motion to approve your report? No? Okay, let's move on to General Manager's report.
Okay, the first item is the monthly financial report for January. It's in your packet. I will point out again that, as Mr. Johnson alluded to, we do continue to have cash flow issues. It's a two-pronged animal. One, the submitting and processing of the invoices to DWR for Prop 1, and also the fact that we're in the low pumping season among the major pumpers, so pumping fees are coming in low. Again, we'll be able to pay the invoices other than Stetson this month, and that'll leave us a balance of $16,501.09. And we're hopeful that the third invoice packet that was submitted, February 6th or 9th for the $186,000 will come in. But again, as Mr. Johnson noted, the balance of that will be transferred over to the brackish account being held by the Water District. So until we get the fourth invoice submitted and processed, we're going to be relying on pumping fees, which should start coming in a little more in the next couple of months. So that's the financial report. The next one, update on the alternatives for funding IWV GSA administrative structure. Again, just an update. Staff has put together a couple different structures for an administrative structure for the GA. We have three, basically. Just putting it simply, there's a full-time staff, a part-time staff, and a contracted staff. There may be some hybrids to those options, but we'll be bringing discussion to the board and looking for direction at the March 19th board meeting, to get some clarity on what type of structure this board would like to see permanently in place. The Water Market Report, Capital Core Group, it's in your packet. Essentially, their activities have been to continue to advocate for the DCIP, and in particular to make those funds directed more towards critical infrastructure projects and water resiliency projects. Again, that $50 million is available, but we want to make sure that it goes towards projects that are for critical infrastructure, so they're continuing to advocate on that. I would add, I think the last paragraph of their report alluded to attending the Association of Defense Communities annual conference, which that has taken place, and a conference call probably next week. I think they requested schedules for Mr. Johnson and myself to coordinate a conference call to discuss what took place there. And I would point out, as mentioned in the report, that was at no expense to the Groundwater Authority, their participation in that conference. So that's it for Capital Core. Well registration, essentially no change. We still have a total of 219 wells registered. Of those, 106 are non-de minimis, 113 are de minimis. That's my brief report.
Thank you, Mr. Zadiba. Let's open it to public for comment. I knew somebody had to speak.
Renee Westelusk, on the well registrations, is that public information that you have? How many are registered with the GA?
I just made it that.
Oh, I'm saying about who is registered, the individual. Is that public information for anybody to find out, or is that because the GA holds this information?
I at this stage do not, in the back of my mind, can think of any public record exception that would make it not a public record. So I don't want to fully opine, but I think it's a public record right now. We haven't had anybody request it yet, so I haven't fully analyzed it, but I really can't imagine that it's not a public record subject to Public Records Act.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to hop up, Judy Decker again. I would like you to know that in light of the 55-gallon-a-day regulation coming down And in light of our dire water situation here, the Eastern Kern County Water District is going to put on a set of talks that will begin in April, don't have a permanent date yet, to help rural and urban landscapers become even more drought tolerant. We're going to have someone speak on using native plants and on the use of hardscape in the landscape. Thank you. I'll let you know a date at the next meeting.
Thank you, Judy. Seeing no further comments, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for comments. Anybody?
I just have one question. This section that's marked on the financials, no longer used for fiscal 2020. What was the thought behind that? Because mixing up administrative with plan, what?
The section below that, you'll see some of those line items were moved down to that. Basically, it's just consolidating.
Oh, okay.
The expenses that are still pertinent are still listed, but they're in that section below that you see.
Okay, so the section below are basically now administrative. Is that?
The what?
That's the section you move down below where the black box is?
That's what we'll be tracking, this year. Yes.
This year, okay.
Any other comments? Mr. Heyman.
Yes, I just have a quick comment on the Capital Corps response. It says that they will be, let me find it here, in February, we plan to deliver these reports to both the Assistant Secretary of the Navy and his staff and follow up with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, which handles the military affairs items. Do we know if a copy of this is being sent to Senator Shannon Grove? Or this information is being made? 'Cause with her being in the Governor's Military Council, I didn't know if it'd be beneficial to the...
I don't know for sure specifically if that's been provided to her. I can find out.
I think the answer is no, but I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Can we see that, that would be, that it would get done and follow up on it?
I'll follow up, yes.
Okay, thanks. That's it.
Okay, seeing no more further comments, we'll move on to closing comments, starting from my left. Tom, you want something? Want to bite at this apple?
No, but I do have some homework to get you guys some more information, and I'll be doing that for our next meeting.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Commander?
Nothing for the Navy.
Thanks, John. I got a couple things real quick.
Sorry?
No,
I have no comment.
Okay, I have three things I want to talk to you about. We had a lot of TBDs on that schedule in the future. We need to nail those down. There are farmers out there that need to make business decisions, and time is money. And so haste is essence, whatever that expression is. Yesterday I had the opportunity, as many of us did, to go listen to President Trump speak. It was a wonderful experience. Painful, have to stand there for 5 hours before he came, but it was wonderful listening to him talk. He was there to sign a resolution or a declaration which was supportive of loosening environmental impacts on in California in terms of fish, delta smelt, and other things which would increase water flows and water supplies to the Central Valley. I thought it was really well delivered, and I thought it was critically important to the people in the Central Valley that they understand that they're not alone and that the federal government is trying to support them. The state has filed something against that happening. So there's a battle about to be waged. Why is that important to us? I did not read the declaration. I don't know exactly precisely what it says. I've not talked to Congressman McCarthy's office about it exactly yet. I see very precious little relationship between that act and him coming down and what he said to how that impacts us in the Indian Wells Valley. But he did use the phrase several times of supporting California communities. So I'm going to take that comment and I'm going to run with it as hard as I can, and I'm going to D.C. Next week to go to a conference, and I'm going to bang on doors and find out exactly what that comment meant, and can we stretch that to have any impact to us here and how our water supplies will be delivered, paid for, and supported by the federal government. So great presentation by the president. I'm going to D.C. next week. I think it's next week, maybe the week after. And 2 weeks? 2 weeks. Okay, 2 weeks. And then I'm working on a Sacramento trip up to talk to DWR, and we're going to get some key players up there on our board to talk about who we are, what we've done, where we're going. We'll talk about Prop 68, of course, but we'll talk about several other things that are going to be important to us in the future in developing that relationship building with all the players that are going to help us. And I just want to reiterate that we need to firm up calendars for farmers. They need information. They need it fast. So let's get it to them as best we can. Thank you. Those are my closing comments. Ms. Kaczynski.
I don't have any comments, believe it or not.
Thank you. Mr. Page, how about you?
No comments. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So that's going to bring us to a closed session. We're going to go to closed session. The time and date of our next meeting is March 19th, 2020. And we're going to adjourn from open session and move into closed session.